We read and we review philosophy. Now, this looks like a meta study. This is called Studying Philosophy Does Make People Better Thinkers by Michael Prinzing and Michael Vazqu. And this is in the Journal of the American Philosophical Association. And it came out this year, so it was new work. And then, is my first time reading it. I will try to explain it as best I can. We'll try to analyze what's going on philosophically. I mean, although this seems like this might be a little bit more scientific. And at the end, we get to rate it. So, yeah. But here we go, I guess. And as always, this is my first time reading it, so let me know. Intro. Philosophy has a reputation for making people better thinkers. Its students learn to dissect arguments and untangle complex problems with clarity and precision. Does it really? I mean, people say this. I remember when I was in college that one of my professors was like, we say this, that philosophy does this. It's a really good sell to like administrators and the general public. Do we actually know if this is true? And she was like, no. Yeah. Okay, you guys are talking amongst yourselves. Okay. They are taught to question assumptions and consider a variety of possible answers to any particular question, even answers that might initially seem strange or unconventional. The methods and practice of philosophy, in other words, seem especially well suited to sharpen one's intellectual faculties and inculcating good habits of mind. This idea has deep historical roots. Yeah, this is the bullshit of the philosophers. Do we actually believe this? And they're actually trying to say, you should believe it, it's good science. Which version is that? The one from the link has 35 pages. This is from, let me know what I do. This is from here. Yeah. So there's data associated with it, Tindarios. So I'm only reading the main part. But like there's data and appendices. I'm not going to read the appendices. I'm not going to read the data bits. So there's like charts and graphs and like other stuff, but I'm not going to read those. Okay, this idea has deep historical roots. Plato and Aristotle, for instance, regarded a philosophical education as essential for cultivating the rational faculties that underpin both individual and societal flourishing. In more recent history, Bertrand Russell argued that much of the value of philosophy lies in its ability to enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind. I need to be able to say that in like a very British accent. Enlarge. No, I can't even do it. Okay. And contemporary philosophers continue this tradition. For example, Jennifer Morton, 2019, has claimed that philosophy teaches you to think and write logically and clearly, and is an antidote to the uncritical acceptance of the world and ourselves as we are. Who, like Heidegger, that he hid his ethics within his metaphysics? No, he didn't. There's nothing there. I mean, I guess that's also a kind of an ethics that it doesn't exist. I mean, in general, and I only learned this recently, there's just not a lot of ethics in existentialist thought. They have to work really, really hard to get any sort of ethics out of existentialism, and I regard that as kind of a problem for them. And I may actually write something on this. Sort of a Socratic response to the existentialists' problem with ethics. Yeah. Kapar says, so far as the stats seem to hold water in terms of methodological choice, I'm looking at the results table now. Okay. Well, I'd hope so. I mean, like I was saying earlier, the Journal of the American Philosophical Association is newer journal, and they're trying to be very good about stuff. So they should have actually, checked this. I don't know, of course. I'm not much on science. Like, I'm not dumb, but like I've not done any proper science. Like, I took like science classes when I was in college, but that's the last that I've done with it. Okay. The closest is Levinas, but he never gives ethics in the sense of principles or guidelines. This is what I mean. It's just either it's lacking or they explicitly state that you could always have done otherwise. And if you can always have done otherwise, then, well, what is the force of normative ethics if like you're not actually bound by it? Yeah. Okay. So, such claims constitute a crucial premise in arguments for the value of philosophical study. There are many variants of this argument depending on the precise details of how one thinks that a philosophical study makes people better thinkers. But the basic structure of the argument goes something like this. A. If an activity cultivates valuable intellectual abilities and dispositions, then that activity is valuable. B. Philosophical study cultivates valuable intellectual abilities and dispositions. C. Therefore, philosophical study is valuable. And this is the argument that you see in universities, like, don't close the philosophy department, we're doing a very important job. We're getting people to learn how to think. And I remember I was told this when I was like an undergrad, and I was so insulted. I was like, I know how to think. What do you think I do all day? I'm sitting around thinking about shit. I know how to think. And so I understood later what they meant by this, but I think this is such a garbage argument, because it's like everyone has to be able to get by on their own. Like everyone here, all of you, philosophical training or not, has to be able to get by in your daily life thinking about shit like you do. You wouldn't be on Twitch if you didn't know how to think. Like, it doesn't matter. And so it's like everyone in practice reasons just fine. So what is it? Like, I hate these arguments, actually. Thinking does not pay. No, it doesn't pay, but you have to be able to get by in your daily life. Zenomox says, personally, I'd say Western philosophy started out describing life, why it's worth doing, and how to play in a way that's satisfying. Only much later did it need to demonstrate a kind of material utility. Yeah, I agree. Like, this always rings of like capitalist apologetics to me. You're trying to create a rational reason for philosophy within a monetary structure, material utility, some sort of capitalism. Chocolate says thinking might not pay and it might be punished. That also is the case. One of the things that has come out in recent years in the United States is that being intellectual and being smart is not a protected class. People have gotten fired from police departments because they were not allowed to be a cop because they score too high on like certain tests, and they said you won't be a good fit for police work, you're going to get bored and you'll be a bad fit for the culture, and so you cannot get a job being a cop because you're too smart. And that's true, because being smart is not a protected class here in the United States. What's up, DeMarshall? This is interesting. Nice timing. I started questioning my choice of studying philosophy. Yeah, there you go. Chocolate says, okay, there may be more ideas of what could be meant by valuable. Yeah. That's right. Okay, we find premise A extremely plausible. That, okay, so if something does make you smarter, then that activity is valuable. Like, that's fair. Like, there is no way you're going to actually think that if you, like, something makes you smarter, then it has no value. Like, sure. So they find A extremely plausible, but we will not offer a defense of it here. Instead, our intent is to scrutinize premise B. Naturally, this premise is an empirical claim. Whether studying philosophy causes improvements in, for example, logical reasoning or facility with language, or whether it fosters dispositions like open-mindedness or curiosity, is not a matter of a priori or conceptual truth. Such claims are not to be verified or rebutted through armchair reflection, but rather through careful observation. Thus, if we are to put forth such claims, we should seek to support them with rigorous analyses of empirical data. In a recent article, Prinzing and Vazqu, so that's the same people here, as you can see, Prinzing and Vazqu below. So that's last year, and this article came out this year. We review extant empirical findings relevant to premise B and presented some new findings of our own. Unfortunately, however, our conclusion was that, quote, we do not have strong evidence one way or the other about whether studying philosophy makes people better thinkers. So, is this the reference of this we here? Is that the we from 2024? I think that is. Okay, so in 2024, they were unable to show any value to philosophy. So the aim of this article, therefore, the one they're talking about now, this one right here, is to provide evidence that would allow for a more definite conclusion. We accessed a very large data set, including records from over 500,000 undergraduate students who attended over 800 colleges and universities across the United States, and applied causal inference techniques to test whether studying philosophy might cultivate valuable intellectual abilities and dispositions. The remainder of the article proceeds as follows. Excuse me. And Bowser, if you're still there, I think I might have forgot to drink for you, so this is yours. In Section 2, we explain why extant empirical evidence does not support causal conclusions and discuss the kind of evidence that could do so. Then in section 3, we consider the merits of different approaches to quantifying intellectual abilities and dispositions. Sections 4 and 5 are the critical ones in which we describe the data and measures and present the results of our analyses. Briefly, our results indicate that students with higher levels of valuable intellectual abilities and dispositions are more likely to study philosophy. Okay, but that means smart people study philosophy, but that doesn't mean philosophy does anything. They may have been smart to begin with. Okay, the authors continue. However, even after accounting for these baseline differences, philosophy majors still outperform students in other majors. In fact, philosophy majors top the charts on 3 out of 5 outcomes that we will examine. Okay, what are these outcomes? Because if you're just saying, well, philosophers do well at things philosophers like, well, no shit, Sherlock. Of course philosophers are going to do things that philosophers like well. But, like, are these generally recognizable? I'm sure they're going to say that. But, like, this is the funny thing. It's like, yeah, philosophers say that philosophy is cool. No great. K-Part says LSAT and GRE scores. Yeah, I've seen all that data before. Philosophers tend to have extremely high scores on standardized tests. My brother, who was a physics major, and we were going to, like, grad school around the same time, made the very bad mistake of betting lunch against me for who would get the higher GRE score. And I took the GRE before he did, so he knew what my results were, and he conceded immediately. My math score wasn't like tippity top, but my language score was like super high, and he realized that he would probably score higher on the math part of the GRE, but there was no space left for him to score high enough that he would overtake my language score, and so he just conceded immediately. But yeah. Thank you for the link. Yeah, you're looking at their code? Okay. Can it help me play tennis better? What's up, Orange Shoe? But it doesn't make him happier. Well, we have to see what the measures are of this, you know? Yeah. Same with IQ scores? Okay, yeah. Okay, finally in section 6, we discuss the implications of these findings. We argue that they constitute probably the strongest available evidence that philosophy fosters valuable intellectual abilities and dispositions, while recognizing that more and different evidence is needed to determine whether it fosters genuine intellectual virtue. Of course, virtue is, a philosophy term, and how you define it is going to really make a big difference here. That is, we find clear support for at least certain popular versions of premise B, and accordingly conclude that the above argument for the value of philosophical study is sound. We wrap up by considering the implications connecting these ideas with debates over the value and proper aims of education, including what educators should strive to cultivate in students, and with arguments from political philosophers about how education can sustain democratic norms and institutions. Yeah. So, again, the philosophers are claiming that philosophy is good and that you should trust their evidence and their arguments for it. It's like, okay. Why extant evidence does not support causal conclusions? Since the 1980s, Hokema 86, philosophers have observed that undergraduates who major in philosophy tend to score remarkably well on standardized tests like the graduate record examination, the GRE, and the law school admission test. Indeed, this fact is widely advertised by philosophy departments at many institutions and by the American Philosophical Association. So yeah, like the organization that in the US, the American Philosophical Association, like advertises philosophy to undergrads, say you should take our courses because you'll get a job as a lawyer or you'll get yourself into a better law school. And that is very attractive to people who want to go into law. Okay. Moreover, numerous studies have found that people who have studied philosophy tend to be more reflective, open-minded, and skilled in logical reasoning than those who have not done so. Unfortunately, although these results establish some striking differences between people who have and have not studied philosophy, they do not support claims about the effects of a philosophical education. This is because group differences of this kind can be explained by self-selection as well as by effects of philosophical study. Yeah, so if all the people who were good at GREs and LSATs also liked taking philosophy courses, then there may not have been the philosophy courses that made them good at that. They just were good at that to begin with, and then, philosophy just was there also, but not causing it. Okay, that is, philosophers may be more reflective, open-minded, and logical because studying philosophy cultivated those dispositions and abilities. Yeah, so you don't know if that philosophy did it. They may have already been that way. But it's also possible that people who are already more reflective, open-minded, and logical are more likely to study philosophy in the first place. Of course, these are not exclusive possibilities. It may be that people who are more skilled with language and logic, more open-minded, and so on are more drawn to philosophy, but then studying philosophy further increases these abilities and dispositions. This is not simply a problem in theory. Recent empirical work has found clear evidence of such self-selection. Yeah, so people who are already this way are choosing to go into philosophy. Kapar says, yeah, without a longitudinal data set, you can't determine the direction of an effect. Yeah. And so a lot of times what you need in these sorts of things, I had a friend from college who went into this in public policy. She would have twin data. So twins who were separated at birth, twins who went to different schools, and then, or twins who lived in like different locations. Then you could see the effects. And she had a very important article showing that environmental hazards affect school outcomes. So twins who would otherwise be identical in terms of genetics, if one of them lived next to a waste treatment plant and had bad environmental factors there, they would have worse outcomes. And so she got kind of like a lot of reputation off this work on like certain studies showing that you need to actually have like good data showing that the environmental hazard affected scholastic outcome. Kapar says, yeah, I mean, they're actually quite thorough, but bring up Judea Pearl and co-founder identification. Okay, yeah. They bring up Judea Pearl. All right. We will see. To illustrate probably the most well-established difference between those who have and have not studied philosophy is that the former tend to be far more reflective. Reflectiveness is typically measured using the cognitive reflection test, or similar measures with questions that lure people into giving intuitive but incorrect responses. One such question asks, if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long will it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? For many people, 100 minutes jumps to mind. Yet a moment of reflection reveals that the correct answer is 5 minutes. People who have studied philosophy are significantly more likely to correctly answer questions like this one compared to those who haven't. Kapars continues, I was pleasantly surprised methodologically. I think their tables are a mess, but adequate. Yeah, okay, so... Well, unfortunately, philosophers are not infographic designers. Maybe they should have gotten an infographic designer to work with them, but yes. We are not always the best at presenting information. Philosophers don't know how to write. Okay. However, in prior work, we found that students in the first week of Philosophy 101 courses also scored dramatically higher than the population average on a version of the cognitive reflection test. That is, these students who were at the very beginning of their philosophical education were already considerably more reflective than most people. Okay, so this is the whole point. The people were self-selecting for philosophy. People who are already good at standardized tests may have been the ones taking philosophy courses. Findings like these highlight the risk that observed differences between philosophers and non-philosophers might result largely or even entirely from self-selection. Kapar says it was probably the journal editor formatting requirements, lol. Kapars, I've dealt with journals now actually a few times. No, the journals have they don't give a flying fuck what you do. They have very little input, actually. They don't care. Or they don't even know. Let's see, what do they look like? Yeah, no. The journal doesn't actually give a fuck. They don't actually do much. I just got something published and someone in chat was shocked that the journal provided no editing services. And I was like, do you think the journals do anything anymore? They don't. So yeah. Okay. Naturally, the ideal way to test for effects of philosophical study on intellectual abilities and dispositions would be to use randomized controlled experiment. With a large sample, randomization to treat and control groups ensure that, on average, baseline characteristics do not differ across groups. This means that subsequent differences in the group's outcomes are highly unlikely to result from pre-existing differences and are highly likely to instead result from the treatment itself. Kapar is more the regression tables. It's just a strange way to represent the data in your opinion. Yeah. It was definitely not the journal. The journal, this is a philosophy journal. These are not scientists running this thing. They probably got reviewers who knew what they were doing to review this paper, but the journal did not I can guarantee you I can all but guarantee you that the journal did not impose any requirements on the kinds of charts and graphs that got used here. Lumen says basically all academic journals are unpaid volunteer stuff, so it's very messy. Yep. Yeah. So it's not good. Okay, unfortunately, although a short-term and small-scale randomized experiment might be feasible, anything at a large scale or over a long term does not seem likely to ever take place. For instance, convincing a large group of college freshmen to allow a coin flip to decide whether they will major in philosophy is both practically and ethically fraught. When it is not possible, not ethical, or simply not practicable, to conduct a randomized experiment, some people will throw up their hands and abandon hope for knowledge of causation. But this reaction is premature. After all, there are many sciences such as epidemiology, economics, and environmental science in which randomized experiments are rare and in many cases impossible or imprudent. For this reason, an entire field of research spanning numerous disciplines has developed methods for supporting causal conclusions with non-experimental data. Yeah, so this is the pearl that was mentioned in the Judea pearl. Within this field, of causal inference research, scholars have developed a range of techniques that can be used to rule out selection effects or other sources of confounding, that is, where two variables are correlated because they share a common cause, known as a confound. Yeah, and so this is explaining their methodology to us idiot philosophers who don't know that, like, you can do causal inference without, like, these kinds of causal experiments. One particularly straightforward causal inference technique called covariate adjustment involves statistically controlling for confounds. The obvious limitation of this approach is that one can never know whether one has measured and controlled for all confounds. But there is an elegant way of effectively controlling for a very broad range of confounds, even without knowing exactly what they are. This is by controlling for baseline differences in the outcome of interest. To illustrate, suppose we want to test whether majoring in philosophy improves logical reasoning abilities. No doubt, a multitude of factors besides students' majors will influence their scores on logic tests, anything from students' educational opportunities in high school to their parents' level of education, their household incomes, or other aspects of their socio-demographic background, etc. The impact of these factors will very likely have occurred by the time the student arrive in college. Thus, if we measured students' logical reasoning abilities both at the start of college and at the end, then by statistically controlling for freshman year scores when examining differences in senior year scores, we can remove the influence of these confounds. In other words, if philosophy students' performance on measures of intellectual abilities or dispositions were due to self-selection, then statistically controlling for baseline differences should make philosophy majors look unremarkable. Yes, conversely, if philosophy students continue to score well on a variety of measures, even after controlling for baseline differences, then this would be at least some evidence that studying philosophy improved their scores. Yeah, so if you can somehow get all the philosophy majors at the freshman level and, make and then pull out all the things that, like, they had at that point, compared to the rest of the incoming freshman class, then you retest everyone at the end. You can say, okay, this is what the philosophy education did if you have, eliminated all the, issues at the beginning. K-Par says, basically each participant serves as their own control and you estimate an average change over individual changes. Yeah, cool. By having a follow-up, you can actually mathematically remove the variance related to idiosyncrasies of the people involved as measurement noise. That's cool stuff. Like modern statistics. Very good. Cool. Okay, how to measure good thinking. It's just funny. Like, the idea that we have any... we can do tests, but we don't actually know what thinking is. Like, we don't have a good definition, but you can do tests. Okay, one centrally important question for a study of this kind concerns the kinds of measures that could aptly gauge the potential effects of a philosophical education. Naturally, there are many different abilities and dispositions that can make a person a good thinker. Some of these might be well captured by standardized tests such as the aforementioned LSAT and GRE. After all, these are fairly comprehensive indexes of verbal, logical, and quantitative reasoning abilities. In fact, the LSAT is primarily a logic test, though it also includes a section that assesses reading comprehension. The GRE has a verbal reasoning section that assesses a person's general facility with the language, as well as a quantitative reasoning section assessing mathematical ability. Since the study of philosophy is often claimed to teach students to use language skillfully, to make subtle distinctions and cogent arguments, and to recognize the logical relations among propositions and reason carefully from them, the LSAT and GRE verbal each seem like fitting empirical metrics. What's up, Adam? They also account for schools as their own cluster. That's good, because like the schools also are going to have a selection bias, the sort of people that go there or apply there and the sort of stuff they take. So they're definitely going to have to account for that. Yep. One potential objection to a focus on standardized tests, especially but not exclusively the SAT, relates to accusations of racial and or socioeconomic biases. It was on the basis of such concerns that around the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, numerous colleges and universities dropped standardized tests from their admissions processes. In the years since, many of these institutions have reversed course and are now requiring applicants to submit test scores again. This is because performance on standardized tests reliably predicts academic success, and removing them from considerations in admissions actually exacerbated the underrepresentation of minority groups. Who's Friedman et al.? Hold on one sec. We are on page 5. I want to see who this Friedman et al. Is. On page 15. Friedman John, okay. Because I know a Friedman who does a lot of statistical analysis. I want to see if it was her. Okay. And removing... Okay. Thus, recognizing that all empirical measures are flawed, limited, and subject to measurement errors of various kinds, standardized tests appear to be some of the best available tools for measuring a wide range of valuable intellectual abilities. Notice how they slid right here. And this is not a bad criticism, but they slid from college outcomes to valuable intellectual abilities. Having a good college outcome is not necessarily having valuable intellectual abilities, but this is the best we probably can do. K-par, so like people within a school will be more similar to each other than between them. It brings down the effective sample size, but they have a fairly large sample, so they have a good estimate of the population. You already said most of that, but your fingers are slow. Yeah, well, that's always part of the issue in streaming is I can talk faster than you guys can type. Although until you get a certain number of people in chat, but then yeah. So, okay. Yet, philosophers also often claim that studying philosophy cultivates certain intellectual virtues like curiosity, intellectual humility, or open-mindedness. Alongside intellectual abilities, these sorts of dispositions also seem quite important for being a good thinker. After all, high test scores show that a person can reason well when prompted and incentivized to do so. But that leaves open the question of whether the person is generally disposed to use their abilities to earnestly and thoroughly pursue truth, to think carefully, critically, and with openness and humility. You can see, this is the thing that annoys me. You can see, I don't give a shit about the truth. I just like interesting ideas, interesting questions. And so, like, even philosophically, I disagree with the way what they were looking at. Even though the pursuit of truth probably doesn't play any real role in their analysis, the way they're describing it, I even think wrong, because I don't think of what I'm up to as, pursuing truth. I never have. I don't expect to get to the truth. I never did. Like, what do you actually think you're going to get to? Maybe you do. Come back to me at when I'm very old and I'll figure out if there was any truth anywhere. But at the moment, still, nah. Which theory of truth do I subscribe to? Usually truth is truth in a model, Luminant. So if you have some sort of pre-existing theory or you're talking about something, the only truth I do is there's truth in a model. I usually use truth is actually a winning strategy in a logic game. So if you have a way to get to the answer that you want in a certain language game, like a logic-y language game, that's what I call that's what we call truth. But that's in a model. There is no capital. I don't have a capital T truth. I don't know if we're gonna get to that, so I don't use the truth simplicator. I just use truth in a model. That's usually good enough. And that's not what I'm interested in for the most part either. Adam says, perhaps for me, truth is theory laden, but for them, it's a claim relative to first order logic. Yeah, but what do you mean? Do you actually think first order logic is the fundamental logic? I don't. I know enough logic to know that there are many other things, and first order logic only covers a certain subsection of things we like to talk about, and there's things outside of that we want to call true. So it's that it's not like, you are correct, Adam, but like there's many good arguments against using that. So it's like, yeah. So, but yeah, so generally I'm using small truth, not a capital T, like this is the way the world is. I'm not making those claims. If I call something true, it means in this situation, this is what we're treating as the case. Is your review of capital T truth is meaningless or just not useful? I'm pragmatist about this. I mean, meaningless, not useful, not worth pursuing, all of that stuff, yeah. Adam says, second question, what would be your logical starting point, if any? For what, Adam? Like, what are we doing? Like, there's certain things that logic is not the right answer to. You need science. You need maybe faith for certain things. I don't know, but like, what do you mean my logical starting point? What are we doing? Like, logic on its own? But like, yeah, like then we're talking about a logical problem of logic. Okay, I can answer that. But what are you interested in? Yeah. I mean, capital T truth, yeah, it's very hard. We've been wrong about a lot of shit before. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you guys know me. This is a hand. I hold this as a hand. I say I know that. But like, yeah, I'm not going to deny that sort of thing. But like, it's very limited, the things I hold to be true. It's like, yeah, you're not going to get a whole lot of it. And what we generally mean by true is that this sort of truth in a model. So yeah, talk to the hand. Exactly. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Naturally, such intellectual dispositions can be very difficult to quantify. Yep. So this is like, again, like they said truth here. I'm like, well, how are you going to talk about the truth? What truth? Whose truth? Like I talk about this is a hand. Like that's true. Okay, but like, and I would say, yeah, that's truth simplicator, but we're talking about that and like a few other Morian facts, and they're just off in space by themselves. It's like, this is not going to be what most people want. Like, that's not what, I don't have a capital T truth that like you're going to use otherwise. I have an epistemology. I mean, that's what I have. I have an epistemology. I don't have a theory of truth. Okay. Empirical measures of, for example, curiosity, intellectual humility, and open-mindedness are going to be self-reports. And in contrast to standardized tests, self-reports are subject to biases, such as self-enhancement bias, where individuals may try to present themselves in overly flattering ways. In short, these two different kinds of measures have complementary strengths and weaknesses. Standardized tests are objective in the sense that they are immune to reporting biases. Kapar says, they have two scales. I'm too lazy to see if they've been validated and how well they do, but I'll give it to them because it's more in support of the LSAT and jury scores. Yeah, so again, it looks like they did a proper statistical analysis in this paper. Good to know. Yeah. They also capture a broad range of important abilities, but might be thought to reflect a relatively thin conception of good thinking. On the other hand, self-reports can capture dispositions like curiosity and open-mindedness that seem to be important aspects of good thinking, but these are less objective in the aforementioned sense. Given these relative advantages and disadvantages, we would ideally like to see our converging evidence from both kinds of measures. That is, although either result would be interesting in its own right, evidence that studying philosophy improves both test scores and self-reported intellectual dispositions would provide particularly strong evidence that the discipline makes people better thinkers. Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I'd have to like see what questions they'd ask. Like, I don't know how I'd answer. Like, are you open-minded? Tell you the truth, fuck no. I've heard so much bullshit in my time. I'm not open-minded. I assume almost everything I hear is bullshit nowadays. I'm not open-minded at all. I'm not expecting to change my mind about shit. I've already heard most of this shit. Adam says, so having many logics under my belt, so how do you approach an argument or evaluate meaning propositions under a logical system you favor or find useful? Just curious what system you use that would leave out the concept of truth, little t. Okay. So question is what I'm doing. So let's say okay, so you need an actual project here, Adam. You gotta do it. Lumen says, I think I'm pretty open-minded, but maybe that's just too philosophical views. Oh, I'm super open-minded to philosophical views, but like I'm not changing my mind for jack shit. All of this is like super hard fought on my side. All my views I fought tooth and nail for, like blood. Like this is like blood. I've given blood for this shit. Like I fought in super fucking hard for my opinions. I'm not changing unless you come with like major fucking theory. Like you better be getting me on like huge amounts of stuff. I'm not changing my mind for shit. But like, yeah, I've heard a ton of theories, so I'll listen to them. But like, I ain't changing. Sockno says, I'm selectively open-minded myself. Yeah, so if the question is like, you need like an interesting question, Adam. So like, I was thinking about a theory of reference not too long ago. I'm thinking about it now still, and how we actually like, you know, refer to stuff. Like, this is a philosophy of language and logic topic. So like, you know, talking about like my orange pencil. I got my orange pencil right here. I'm showing it to you. How do we refer to orange pencil? I'm showing it to you in some sense. Like, there's a theory where it's like, well, I'm doing something, I'm demonstrating, and I'm demonstrating it by holding it up. And that's how I'm referring to it. I'm describing it by orange pencil, the one I was holding, that sort of thing. So that's not really a logic question. At that point, it's like, well, I do something. I start off with a example, a phenomena. I start off with phenomena mostly. What's going on in my world? What am I doing? And that's how I look at it. And then I go into like metaphysics and logic, Adam. I then say, okay, how would Wittgenstein describe this thing? How would Heidegger describe this thing? How would Hegel describe this thing? How would Bertrand Russell describe this thing? What's the general scientific view of like what's going on right here? Because like, you know, there's still in the year of our Lord 2025. I mean, we're living in a very scientific society. So like, I'm going to say, well, what's the general like received view of this? So I start going through different metaphysics, different ways of logically approaching stuff. Like, there are different like logics I could use. That's a little bit more subtle when you're just talking about you know, a simple sentence like this. But I look at the phenomena and I look at what we're doing, and then I say, well, what's important here? Like, what are we trying to do? And so it's like, I'm placing it in the metaphysics. I'm really a metaphysician. Like, I've said this many times. I think about things like, what's the background metaphysics? And I start thinking, what do these different people say, and how do they describe it, and what do I think is good and bad about those different stuffs? Chocolate says, some stories I stop reading fast forward by, I guess it's a risk. Yeah. Well, I mean, life's short. Life is too short for reading stuff you don't want to read. Like, sometimes you have to read it for some reasons, and that's fine because you have a goal. But like, if you don't want to read some shit and you don't have to, go find something you do want to read. DeMarshall says, wait, you're telling me you have a justification for every thought I have? I'm nuts, DeMarshall. Mostly, yeah. And that's why I also say, I've said this a lot, I don't default. I don't have default theories. I don't just like be like, okay, this is how things are, and this is like the default way people think about them. No, I don't do that. Like, I basically be like, all right, I don't know, but I don't just be like, well, it's clearly a scientific answer, or it's clearly this metaphysical thing. I don't just default to like, well, God made it that way. No, I don't do that. Or science says so. Like, no, I don't do those sorts of things. Adam says, take the realm of philosophical education, like in this paper. The confounds are ruled out using some method and outcomes. So which logical system to these practices is applied to make sense of these statements, at least supposed to be true statements? Okay, so this paper is working in a scientific framework. They are not there. What they're doing here, actually, in the beginning parts, and this is a good question, like, what is going on here? They're trying to narrow down the things that they're going to measure. They're trying to justify and argue for their science that they're going to present in the next few paragraphs. And you can see right here, data and measures for the present study. This is exactly what's coming up. They're justifying what they did. That's what's going on here. So they're doing some background theory to then justify their methodology, their scientific methodology. Because if you're measuring something that's too flaky, too amorphous, too like ambiguous, then you can't actually do science on that, because the results of the science are going to just inherit the ambiguity, and you won't have a good data. So what they're doing here is they're trying to say, well, we have the objective LSATs and GREs, and we also have these self-reports, and we're going to do a lot of statistical analysis to get as best a rounded picture as we can. So this is in a scientific framework. So now we're talking about p-values. We're talking about like statistical significance, these sorts of things. We're going to be talking about the sorts of data, evidence, and then statistical significance. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about modern science here and applying a little bit of, we did a little bit of philosophy, and then we're going to apply some science to that. And that's what's going on here. But, you know, they had to spell this out. This is their general framework, is we're using the statistics as fundamental here. That's the background assumptions. These are the presuppositions. We have background theories, and we're going to rely on them to make our results significant in the way that we want, which is the causal stuff, that philosophy does cause us to think better. That's what they're doing. So you have to take that on, in some sense, faith, or you have to go study the statistical analysis yourself. As was said in chat by K-Pars, they referenced Judea Pearl, who's like, this is like the standard practice here. And so K-Pars is now saying, what is actually the theory behind this? Thank you, K-Pars. But like, this is the idea. We are looking at this through a scientific lens with a little bit of philosophy sprinkled in to clarify what's going on. Now, that's a real philosophy speedrun strat. P-hacking, yeah. Yep. Okay, so this is basically the end of the philosophical analysis. Now we're going to transfer into the science right here, because like here, data measures for the present study, but like this is the end of the discussions of the justifications for the things they are looking at, the measures. They're using a maximum likelihood based approach for estimation. Okay, yeah. So yeah, this is it. Like this is they had 5 pages of philosophy, and now they're gonna have 5 pages of like describing what they were doing. And here, and like they're gonna like you see, we're already getting charts and graphs on the next page. Okay, data and measures for the present study. We analyzed data collected between 1990 and 2019 by the Higher Education Research Institute, HERI. And Cooperative Institutional Research Program based at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Data from students graduating between 1994 and 2008 are publicly accessible in the HERI's data archive. So they have links here to the data. To access the more recent data, we had to apply and pay a fee. Okay, you see this? So like they're saying, hey, we actually had to, like, as philosophers, we had to go get money to do our work. Like, that's impressive there. Or no, see, they had to apply and pay a fee. Okay, so they had to justify their work to these people to show them that they're legit and pay that money to do it. Participating students completed surveys at the start of their freshman year and end of their senior year in which they reported on their academic majors, standardized test scores, socio-demographic backgrounds, and more. Incoming freshmen were asked to report their SAT score, and prior to 2005, graduating seniors were also asked to report their GRE and LSAT scores, assuming they had taken these tests. Starting with the 2010 cohort, the surveys also included self-report measures called the Habits of Mind and Pluralistic Orientation Scales. The individual questions in these scales are presented in Table 1. In their online documentation, the HERI describes these respectively as assessing, quote, the behaviors and traits associated with academic success and lifelong learning, and the skills and dispositions appropriate for living and working in a diverse society, end quote. But just looking at the survey questions themselves, the Habits of Mind scale seems to assess traits like curiosity, intellectual rigor, and to some extent intellectual humility and open-mindedness. The Pluralistic Orientation scale seems to be in effect a measure of open-mindedness. Okay, so you see what they're doing right here. They're interpreting the tests in the way that they think is relevant to what they want it to be. Now, is it actually that? I don't know. But you can see right here, they're interpreting what other people were doing according to their lens. That's an interesting thing to do. They're putting it in a certain light. They're treating it a certain way. That's okay, but you saw they had 5 pages of theory, and then they're saying, and this is good for what we said earlier. Yeah, and Kpar says they list the questions below so we can take a look. Yeah. I saw that they had it right here. So it's like, yeah, but again, they're framing the question in a certain way, and framing the question or framing the issue in a certain way does affect the reader. So just pointing this out. The HERI computes composite scores from each set of items. Specifically, these are factor scores from each item response theory. Specifically, these are factor scores from item response theory models. Further detail can be found online. For ease of interpretation, we standardize these composite scores, meaning that we scale them to have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Hence, a student with a score of 1 is at 1 standard deviation above average, whereas someone with a score of minus 0.5 is half a standard deviation below average. The full sample includes N equals 649,511 students, including N equals 4,843 philosophy majors, attending 804 colleges and universities around the United States. Of these, 59% identify as female, 35 as male, and 5 did not indicate sex. 72 identified as white, 5 Asian or Islander, Pacific Islander, 5 as black or African American, 4 as Latino, as 5% as mixed, and 2% as another race or ethnicity, and 7 did not indicate race or ethnicity. So we've got 72% is white. Okay, so it's almost 2/3. Yeah, it's more than 2/3 white, or a little under 3/4. Okay, because GRE and LSAT scores were only collected from students between 94 and 2004, that's 392,858, mind you, and the habits of mind and pluralistic orientation scales were only administered to students graduating in 2010 or later, that's 122,352. Some of our analyses used a subset of the full sample. But this is what I think K-Pars was saying earlier. These are big numbers for doing statistical analysis, or at least they seem sufficiently big for doing the kind of analysis that they want to perform here. You can't be doing this on a few hundred people. You won't get good data out of that. But when you're doing it on some of these things with 649,511 students, then you actually do start to be able to say, okay, you're going to get statistical significance off this. Okay, and so these are the items from the self-reports. This is table 1, so it's worth going over this. How often in the past did you, and responses or options are not at all, occasionally, or frequently. 1, seek solutions to problems and explain them to others. Jesus fucking Christ, I do this every fucking week. You need ratios and compare and contrast. Yeah, sock now, exactly. 2, support your opinions with a logical argument. God damn it, I do that too much. 3, look up scientific research articles and resources. I never look up scientific research articles. I look up philosophical research articles and resources all the time, though. 4, take a risk because you felt you had more to gain. I've done that a few times in the past year. 5, accept mistakes as part of the learning process. Yeah, we done that. 6, take on a challenge that scares you. I don't know, I haven't done anything like super scary. 7, ask questions in class. I ain't in no class. 8, explore topics on my own, even though it's not required for class. I done that. Or at least not for work. 9, evaluate the quality or reliability of information you received. Well, yeah, I'm calling bullshit on this paper here right now, sometimes. And 10, seek alternative solutions to a problem. Yeah, all the fucking time. It's like my entire job at work. It's like, hey, we've been screwed over yet again by management. Let's go find some other way to not break everything. Okay, pluralistic orientation. How would you rate yourself in the following areas? And the responses are a major weakness, somewhat weak, average, somewhat strong, a major strength. 1, ability to see the world from someone else's perspective. I think I'm somewhat strong at that. Like, not everyone. I think I'm better than average. I've had to put a lot of time into seeing things from other people's perspective because I'm a weird person. And so I've had to put a lot of time into figuring out how other people are thinking of shit because I usually am not thinking of it in the same way. You're 10 for 10. There you go. 2, tolerance of others with different beliefs. And everyone disagrees with me. That's all I have. This is my entire life. 3, openness to having my own views challenged. Yeah, you can do it. You're wrong, but you can do it. 4, ability to discuss and negotiate controversial issues. Yeah, well, I have a fucking Twitch stream. 5, ability to work cooperatively with diverse people. Yeah, I do that at work. They're not like me. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Some of the stuff maybe I ranked a little lower on, but, I try to. Granted, I also have a philosophy Twitch stream, so yeah. Okay, empirical findings. We first looked for evidence of selection effects by testing whether students who score higher on the SAT and the self-reported measures of intellectual dispositions in the freshman year survey are more likely to major in philosophy. Second, we tested whether at senior year philosophy majors score higher than non-philosophy majors on the GRE, LSAT, habits of mind, and pluralistic orientation, even after controlling for baseline differences. Third, we compared the baseline adjusted averages for specific majors to see where philosophy places in the rankings. Finally, we looked for evidence of a distinct kind of selection effect related to the kinds of students who take the GRE and LSAT, explained further below, that could potentially have biased the standardized testing results. Lumen says, philosophy ruins my abilities to do surveys. Yep. It's like, I'm just, you know, I'm just going to do my rational shit. I'm just going to like rationalize this, what I think must be the case. I reject your reality and replace it with my own. Okay, our analyses used mixed effects regression models, logistic regressions for dichotomous outcomes with random intercepts for institutions, that is, the colleges and universities that students attended. All right, I don't know what these words mean here. I don't know what random intercepts are. And I don't know what regression models are, although I know something about that, but I don't really know what logistic regressions for dichotomous outcomes. I don't know these words. Like, I don't. Now, I've seen studies before, so I assume I've seen something like this, but I don't know what these words are. Kapar says it means each school makes its own line. Yeah, but like, cool. But well, I'm just announcing, like, this is outside my like knowledge base. Like, I don't know this stuff. This is science and statistics I never took. Yeah. Logistic regression is modeling the outcomes as the log of p over 1 minus p. Okay, there we go. Basically the log odds, yeah. Lumen says that also every question is like too unclear, don't know how to answer. Yeah, I get that too on these tests. I'm like, what exactly do you mean by these questions? Like, philosopher, get out of here. Okay, so the authors fit these models using the LME4 and LMER test package in R, computed estimated marginal means using the means package, and used multiple imputation to accommodate missing data with the mice package. The code used in these analyses is available online. Below, we describe the results in colloquial English. More detailed results of the statistical model are given in tables A1 and A2 in the appendix, which I am not reading. But I will take their word for that they are not completely screwing up what they did when they describe it in the next few sections. Okay. Intellectual abilities and dispositions predict whether students major in philosophies. Okay, we look for evidence of selection effects by testing whether students score on SAT Verbal, SAT Math, and freshman year habits of mind and pluralistic orientation scales could predict whether they would end up majoring in philosophy. Results indicate that apart from SAT Math, each of these predictors was statistically significant. Okay, so yeah, if you score high on this, then you are going to self-select for being a philosophy major outside of the math, which probably has major overlap between the sciences and engineering. Kapar says, one thing I will say is that you can only use imputation when the data is missing at random. Okay. Scores on the verbal selection section of the SAT were the strongest predictor. More precisely, a 1 standard deviation increase in SAT Verbal is associated with a 57% greater odds of majoring in philosophy. Yeah, it's us and the English majors that have like super high verbal on the SAT. 1 standard deviation increases in the habits of mind and pluralistic orientation scales are associated respectively with 34 and 13% greater odds of majoring in philosophy. Again, SAT Math was not statistically significant, yeah. Because again, you're going to get all the engineers and math and science people. Basically, the STEM people are going to be good at math too. So you're going to get a lot of them. Kapars continues, if there's selectivity in the missing data from differential dropout or loss to follow up, you're imputing over a biased data set. Okay. So yeah, you have to be super careful. Yeah, again, I can only take other people's word for this. Kapars knows what they're talking about. These people apparently look like they know what they're doing, so yeah. And again, the journal this is sponsored by the American Philosophical Association. They would be very embarrassed if they didn't actually like properly check this data. Okay. The Marshall says, are they going to mention how philosophy sometimes just isolates people because since none of the masses care about it? Yeah. There are also nasty effects of philosophy. Like, I wonder, you could cross-correlate depression, existential dread, and angst, all that stuff too. I bet they did not do that for this paper. Yeah. It's like, also, you're going to cross-reference mental health issues with philosophy majors. Let's see that data. Okay. In short, these results indicate that students with better verbal reasoning ability, though not mathematical ability, and who are more curious, open-minded, and intellectually rigorous than their peers are more likely than their peers to major in philosophy. These results continue to indicate that people who have studied philosophy score well on measures of intellectual abilities and valuable intellectual dispositions, at least partly because philosophy attracts people who independently score well on such measures. The question remains, however, does studying philosophy itself foster these intellectual abilities and dispositions? Kapar says, like, the checks aren't in their analysis code, but it's like validating the methods rather than the methods. So it's a little under the hood. Yeah. I mean, again, someone will have to, that knows statistics and the area would have to go through this. 5.2, adjusting for baseline differences, philosophers still outperform their peers. Next, we compared philosophy and non-philosophers' majors scores on senior year standardized tests and self-report measures while adjusting for baseline differences observed at the start of the freshman year. The idea again is that students' intellectual abilities and dispositions are shaped by many factors beyond their academic majors, such as prior educational opportunities and socio-demographic backgrounds. These factors will also affect students' scores at the start of college. So by controlling for freshman year scores, we should be able to remove the influence of pre-college confounds, thereby giving a more accurate estimate of the treatment effects. Figure 1 plots the results. Starting with the standardized tests, we ran 3 separate models for scores on the GRE Verbal, GRE Quantitative, and LSAT. Unsurprisingly, SAT scores were significantly positively associated with GRE and LSAT scores across the board. Alright, who knows what this... And this is why I don't do scientific papers mainly, because it's real hard for me to sit here and figure out what all these charts mean and then explain it to you. I could read the caption underneath it, but I'm just going to continue on. Maybe if they describe it in the text, I'll go back to it. But crucially, after accounting for SAT scores, philosophy majors scored significantly higher than non-philosophy majors on the GRE Verbal and LSAT. On the GRE Quantitative, by contrast, there was no significant difference between philosophy majors and philosophy and non-philosophy majors. Kapar says its average difference versus measurement noise for non-philosophy majors versus philosophy majors. Okay. Yeah. Turning to the self-report measures, we tested whether philosophy majors scored higher on the habits of mind and pluralistic orientation scales during senior year while adjusting for their scores during freshman year. Unsurprisingly, the freshman year scores were significant predictors in both cases. But crucially, after accounting for these baseline differences, philosophy majors still scored significantly higher than non-philosophy majors on both habits of mind and pluralistic orientation. Dots are means, bars are errors. Okay, yeah. So again, yeah, it's like, again, I could talk about this, but like these are, okay, so you guys can't see these probably little things. So this is GRE Verbal, GRE Quantitative, LSAT, Habits of Mind, and Pluralistic Orientation, and you can see that like there's little lines, like that you can see the dots here and it goes up this way, and then this one is flat, and this is the quantitative one. This one goes up, and then this one also goes up, and then this one also goes up. So they're basically saying on everything except for the quantitative, it goes up. Like, yeah. And like these numbers, I don't know what these numbers mean. Clearly they are like scores or whatever, or maybe percentages. Like, all right, I have to take their word for it. Where was I? Yeah, those are raw GRE scores. Yep. Okie doke. Okay, these results indicate that even after accounting for differences in pre-college verbal and quantitative reasoning abilities, philosophy majors display stronger verbal and logical, though not quantitative, reasoning abilities than their peers. More precisely, the SAT adjusted average score for philosophy majors on the GRE Verbal, that is 573 out of a possible 800, is about 33 points higher than that of non-philosophy majors, that is 540. This amounts to a standardized mean difference, that is difference between groups in terms of standard deviation, of 0.48, which according to a common convention would be considered a medium-sized effect. On the LSAT, the SAT adjusted average score for philosophy majors, that is 157 out of a possible 180, is about 2 points higher than that of a non-philosophy major, that is 155. This standardized mean is a difference of 0.35, or a small to medium-sized effect. Similarly, senior philosophy majors reported greater levels of positive intellectual dispositions than their peers, encompassing curiosity, intellectual rigor, intellectual humility, and open-mindedness, even after controlling for reports of such dispositions in freshman year. These effects would conventionally be termed small effects, standardized mean differences of 0.24 of habits of mind and 0.21 for pluralistic orientation. Now, although contrasting philosophy majors with non-philosophy majors enables a simple, statistically powerful comparison, it also conceals a great deal of diversity within the non-philosophy group. For all we have shown so far, there may be other majors that substantially outperform philosophy. Hence, to test the claim that there is something truly special about the study of philosophy, making it distinctively well-suited to cultivating good thinking, we compared philosophy majors with other specific majors, again while controlling for baseline levels of the outcomes. The sample includes students with 90 different majors, but some of these majors are represented by only small numbers of students. Hence, in these analyses, we exclude majors with fewer than 200 students. This ensures that each major's average stably reflects characteristics of that major rather than sampling variability. After these exclusions, the analyses involving the standardized test include 57 majors, and the analyses involving the self-reports included 62 majors. Comparing the baseline adjusted average scores for all these different majors revealed something truly striking. Although philosophy majors are unremarkable when it comes to GRE quantitative, placing 30th out of 57, they rank first on the GRE verbal, first in the LSAT, first on the habits of mind scale, and sixth on the pluralistic orientation scale. These rankings are presented in figures 2-3. Kapar says the HON and open-mindedness were in a standard deviation units. Oh, this is interesting. They will have to adjust for false positive rates. Math will hit hard. Yes, it does. And Adam says, wow. Yeah, so, okay, so when comparing across majors, philosophy was ranked 1 on a few of these, and the habits of mind, except 6th on the pluralistic orientation scale, but that's out of 57 majors, basically. So, yeah. Dang, we smart. Yeah. We so good. And, and the philosophers tell us so. That's right. We're the statisticians we like tell us so. Okay, do only the best and brightest philosophy students take the GRE or LSAT? The most differences aren't statistically significant, strong evidence. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the issue. You're going to wash out a lot of this, or like the top 5 to 10. I mean, okay. Low on plural for shutting shit down, yeah. I mean, it looks like they're getting at least some small bump by studying philosophy. It doesn't look like they're going for any major bump here. They're just not going to get that. But I mean, even a small statistical bump on philosophy is like, okay, yeah. So yeah. All right. Yeah, the figures are cool. Yep. Okay. Do only the best and brightest philosophy students take the GRE or LSAT? Yeah, so is there even bias in who takes the tests? Thus far, we have focused on trying to rule out the possibility that philosophy majors' impressive intellectual abilities and dispositions result from the fact that the majors attract students who already have such abilities and dispositions. But there is another kind of selection bias that might pose a problem for our standardized testing results. This has to do with the fact that only a small proportion of undergraduates actually take the GRE or LSAT, and the characteristics of those who choose to do so probably varies from one discipline to the next. Hence, it could be that only the best and brightest philosophy majors decide to go to graduate school, and so take the GRE or LSAT, whereas many of the more middling students from other disciplines do so. If so, then the average score for philosophy majors might be especially high, not because of philosophy majors' impressive intellectual abilities, but merely because only the top philosophy students actually take the tests. Kapar says, basically the bars on those graphs overlap, it's not a significant difference, so draw a ruler straight line down from the left end of the philosophy bar. Okay, so like, yeah, so this philosophy, so it's like here, like all of this stuff, like it's just, so some, oh, God, I can't draw straight with this, but like, yeah, you can draw, whoopsie. Like, yeah, so like if you're here, Kapar says, like it's hitting some of them, but it is above a lot of them. So it's like you can kind of see that it's at the very edge of them or it's above a lot of them. So yeah. Kind of cool. Thanks for doing that. Yeah. Okay. If this speculation were correct, then we should see a stronger association between SAT scores and the odds of taking the GRE or LSAT among philosophy majors than non-philosophy majors. It may be that students with higher SAT scores are, in general, more likely to take subsequent standardized tests. But if there were a selection effect of this second kind, then the association between SAT scores and whether students take subsequent tests should be especially strong among philosophy majors compared with non-philosophy majors. We look for evidence of this second kind of selection by testing whether students' SAT scores and whether students major in philosophy predict whether they take the GRE or LSAT, and also whether there is an interaction between these two predictors. Yeah. So this is the GRE verbal, and I'm unsurprised that the philosophy majors are way above a lot of other majors there, and the GRE quantitative, yeah, we're in the fucking middle. But you can see who gets the highest GRE quantitative on quantitatives. This is physics. I'm sure you guys can't read it if you're looking on the screen, but physics is the top, and then the mathematical statistics is under it. Mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, aerospace engineering, civil engineering, computer science. Those are these and other engineering and chemistry. These are rounding up like the top 10 or whatever. So like all the the tough physical sciences are at the very top in engineers, yeah. So yeah, philosophy is like, we're in the middle there. Okay, so we've got lots of stuff. So there's the habits of mind. We're up here at the top again. And so as K-Par says, like you should only, like it's close on all these, a few of these, but then a whole lot of them are not close. Okay. Results indicate that students with higher SAT scores are indeed more likely to take the GRE, and that philosophy majors are more likely to take the GRE than non-philosophy majors. Crucially, however, we found no interaction, that is, no evidence that the association between SAT scores and the odds of taking the GRE differ between philosophy and non-philosophy majors. Turning to the LSAT, we found a similar pattern of results. Unsurprisingly, again, students with a higher SAT score are more likely to take the LSAT, and philosophy majors are more likely, about 3.5 times more likely, to take the LSAT than non-philosophy majors. Crucially, we again found no interaction. Thus, we found no evidence of this second kind of potential selection effect, whereby philosophy majors' impressive performance on the GRE and LSAT results from a tendency for only the best and the brightest philosophy majors to take these tests in the first place. Okay, implications and conclusion. These findings support a popular and venerable argument for the value of philosophy. Yay, we thought we were good and we are good, we found out. Sorry. I can't help my a little bit of a scorn for being a philosophy major. It's like, yeah. Although, to be fair, philosophy majors also have decent pay outcomes, too. Like, there's a big split. Some philosophy majors make a lot of money, a lot of them make not that much, but on average, we don't do that badly either. I mean, currently, I don't make a lot of money, but I do have some stuff. We'll see how it goes in the future. That argument, as discussed in section 1, rests on a crucial empirical premise, namely that studying philosophy makes people better thinkers. In a recent review, we conclude that there was an absence of evidence concerning this premise. Here we brought to bear a far larger body of data than any prior study and conducted more rigorous analyses. The data included records from over 500,000 undergraduate students attending over 800 institutions across the United States. Moreover, because we have data from these students both at the start and end of their time in higher education, we were able to account for pre-existing differences when comparing philosophy majors with their peers. In this way, we controlled for a host of potential confounds when estimating the effects of philosophical study. Our results indicated that students with better... Yeah, stretch for Bowser too. Okay. Our results indicate that students with better verbal reasoning abilities and more curiosity, intellectual rigor, and open-mindedness are more likely to major in philosophy. They also indicated that, after adjusting for baseline differences, philosophy majors outperform other students on these measures. You know what I was just thinking? No, I guess I'm wrong. I was going to say, you should test them, if there was any way to test people after they get out of school and then had jobs for a few years. Would this have long range effect, or would there be a different effect not in school or whatever? Would these people have just basically continued on this on their own without the philosophy major? The data might actually be linkable. I mean, there are links here. You probably could click on them. So yeah. I mean, I don't really want to do that at the moment because you can, of course, everyone can download this paper. Okay, philosophy majors score higher than all other majors on the GRE Verbal and LSAT, as well as self-report measures designed to assess good habits of mind. Short of a randomized experiment, which for various ethical and practical reasons is unlikely to ever take place, these findings arguably constitute the clearest and strongest kind of empirical support that we will find for the claim that studying philosophy makes students better thinkers. K-Park says if it's from university students, they can link by SSN to their career history and earnings history. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, what was that, the Harry data we were talking about earlier? Yeah, so it might be possible to like go back and like correlate all this stuff, but yeah, you'd probably have to like keep the data like privatized in a hard way. So you're right, that might actually be doable, but it would be a pain in the butt. Okay. One important caveat comes from the possibility that certain aspects of the intellectual abilities assessed by the jury in LSAT are not well assessed by the SAT. For example, unlike the LSAT, the SAT does not include a section dedicated specifically to logical reasoning. Thus, it may be that controlling for SAT scores does not fully account for pre-college differences in logical reasoning abilities. One way to overcome this limitation would be to have students complete the exact same tests, which could be based on the LSAT or other tests, such as the California Critical Thinking Skills Test, at the start and end of their education. Future work may also be able to extend these findings by exploring whether specific forms of philosophical study might affect students differently. For example, do students who focus on ethics show different effects from those who focus on metaphysics? What about students in more analytic versus continental departments? Another interesting avenue would be to look for a dose-response relationship, for example, by testing whether philosophy majors differ from philosophy minors who might be thought to have received a smaller dose of philosophy. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, is there a bigger change in certain areas of philosophy, or like do people who like study metaphysics have like a bigger change compared to people who study ethics, or vice versa? Who knows? One limitation of these findings is that although the habits of mind and pluralistic orientation items capture some of the behaviors and motivations characteristic of intellectual virtues, they do not speak to the objects, occasions, and means of their exercise. Thus, they do not capture the full profile of intellectual virtues as philosophers traditionally conceive of it. To determine whether students of philosophy use their intellectual abilities for the right reasons, with the right means, on the right occasions, and directed at the right objects would require further and potentially a very different kind of evidence. Relatedly, there are many intellectual virtues that one could examine, and the measures used here only touched on a few. For example, one of the items from Habits of Mind scale could be seen as tapping intellectual humility, but there are other more effective measures of intellectual humility that one could use. And naturally, one could also consider whether studying philosophy supports virtues like intellectual autonomy, fair-mindedness, intellectual courage, or others. Finally, there are numerous other kinds of claims about the value of philosophy besides its ability to cultivate intellectual abilities or dispositions. Some would claim that philosophical study supports students' holistic formation as persons, or that it fosters autonomy, or bestows them with powerful knowledge. These are plausibly laudable educational goals, but our findings do not speak to these claims. Perhaps further work could investigate these sorts of outcomes, although there is room for reasonable skepticism about the prospects for empirically assessing them. Yeah, and so, I mean, even I was like, the way we're interpreting the questions and data, even for what these authors gave, was still questionable at certain times. How much do self-assessments actually matter for your open-mindedness? And that's what they were saying right up here, and also down here. Like, what exactly can we really objectively say these things do for us? It's harder to say, or harder to pin down, really. Okay. Nonetheless, the intellectual abilities and dispositions assessed in this study seem both useful and admirable. See, they're hedging right here, of course. They know this. Seem. They say seem. It seems good. This is the best we got at the moment. And that's fair. It is the best we got at the moment, as far as I've ever heard. This is the best I've ever seen on this topic. And it's a spanking brand new paper. It's from this year. Skill with logic enables people to make better inferences, which should plausibly lead them to form more true and fewer false beliefs. I did see something recently where people who were able to predict outcomes, like they were able to imagine like the most plausible outcomes, were, most likely to have greater success. So in some sense, the ability to like logically restrict your thought to the most plausible outcomes and then decide amongst those outcomes should be useful. Yeah. So, lead them to form more true and fewer false beliefs. Again, I don't give a shit about true and false, but I say what is most likely plausible given what our information is now. Okay, facility with language enables people to articulate their beliefs more clearly to others. The dispositions critical for lifelong learning and open, humble thinking are plausibly useful for people in all walks of life. Though the degree to which the various measures used here predict specific outcomes later in life could itself be tested empirically. And that's what, I was just saying to K-Pars, and K-Pars were saying we could possibly do if we correlate these studies with further outcomes after the fact. Hence, if philosophical study cultivates these abilities and dispositions, as our findings suggest, then this is good news indeed for philosophy. In the highly technocratic and bureaucratized world of the 21st century academy, the ability to point to such measurable outcomes is often necessary to maintain institutional support for departments and programs. Hence, our findings may have some utility for those advocating for the discipline. And I'm sure this was in the back of their head when they were doing this, is that they were like, please, Lord, let us have something to show the fucking administrators so that we can say we have data here. Exactly, the money. Adam. Finally, although we have focused specifically on intellectual outcomes, these same sorts of abilities and dispositions are thought to have substantial implications for the political life of pluralistic societies. For decades, political philosophers have argued that dispositions that facilitate rigorous and autonomous reflection are essential not only for individual flourishing, but also for sustaining democratic norms and institutions. According to this view, the kinds of intellectual capacities that we have examined support, for example, the ability to tolerate and engage charitably with diverse perspectives and to find common ground within pluralistic societies, and that these are in turn essential for the health of democracy. Although our study does not directly assess these sorts of civic outcomes, it is noteworthy that philosophy majors ranked highly on a measure like the pluralistic orientation scale, which was designed specifically to assess skills and dispositions appropriate for living and working in a diverse society, and regarded as an important indicator in the success of a liberal education. Sakna says, it's funny how easy it is to find money in a paper like this. Yep. I wouldn't make it this obvious, Lamont. Dude, of course I'd make it this obvious. Of course I would. Because philosophy departments are very quick to get axed. Because they're politically bad. Not because they don't make money, but because people think, the idiot philosophers. So you definitely want it explicit so that, look at this data. We actually do make money and we have good outcomes. You need it. It's a requirement, Sakna. It would be worthwhile in future work to explore these broader civic and moral effects of philosophical study more directly. After all, it is one thing to form sharp analytical thinkers, and quite another to cultivate intellectually virtuous citizens inclined to use their minds responsibly in service of the common good. Yeah. All right, we got through it. Little long, but not bad. 2.5 hours in stream time. An hour and a half reading this bout. But yeah, now we review this paper. It was a little bit more sciencey, but it still had philosophical content. Sort of how do we actually interpret the goods of philosophy? So if you thought, always, Lumen, it's always a speed run. So if you thought this had fun ideas and made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. Spelling and capitalization do count. If you thought this had existential artistic drama, I mean, not too much here. Nog Scream, Ouroboros for deep ancient ideas. Nog Navel, navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also give it the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, or my vote meh. Note that I calculate a overall score. Anything in the green will make the score go up. Anything in the red will make the overall score go down. And the vote meh actually moves everything towards the middle. So what do we think about this? Again, a little bit more sciencey. We were just discussing what are the goods of philosophy at the beginning, which I guess counts as a philosophical topic. But then after that, we did move into statistical analysis. So I mean, yes. Oh yeah, I didn't even say Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. This is you didn't get a small N on the Nog Navel. I'll fix that if you don't, DeMarshall. So Nog Navel, this is. Yeah, a little navel gazing, but I'm also going to get a Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. This was a lot of that. K-Pars gave it a brain dance, 2 mez, a navel, and a yay. DeMarshall gave it, thank you for fixing that, DeMarshall, appreciate it. I'm giving it 2 knives. I mean, this was very sciencey. This was a little bit of this is what the data is, and this is how it goes. So they're getting the knives for the science aspects and the statistical analysis. I'd say, and Adam, thank you for the brain dance, Naval and the yay. K-Pars, thank you for your, I mean, I don't know why you're weird, but like, yeah, we all sat here through this. It is a bit of a brain dance. It was kind of fun. And Maze, Nog, Naval, and the yay. Chocolate says, might be interesting to go back and learn stats. Vote meh. Oh, unfortunately, the fucking thing doesn't like the comma. But I'll fix that later for you, Chocolate, if you don't fix the vote meh. Sock now. I should fix... Can I fix punctuation? I might be able to. Sock now, thank you for the brain dance, navel gazing, knife, and a yay. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, this is actually, you know... I feel like I should give it a vote yay for, just, like, propaganda purposes. Like, everyone should know that philosophy is good, but, like, it's good. I mean, yeah, I guess they deserve a... Do I have to... I mean, I don't know. Like, yeah. Thank you, Chocolate Mints. K-Par says, like, it's philosophically working from a lot of assumptions about what it is they're measuring, why that's how the idea they're measuring exists, but it was statistically sound enough. It was fun science, but math philosophy. You know, I always have a soft spot for people who go and try and, like, do something new. So it's like, I kind of like the idea that, like, they came out and said, yeah, we are taking the data as best we got it. This is the best we got. So what can we do with this? It's like, yeah, it's like, I don't feel like, like, I kind of like the idea that they're doing this. It says, look, no one's making any clever, like, big claims about, like, some big claim about what philosophy does. This is, like, the best we have, and does it show a statistically significant result? And they're like, yeah, it's not a huge statistically significant result, but they had, like, a low to medium statistically significant result, and that's basically the best we can ask for. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, it's not bad. So it's like, do I feel like, I feel like it is alright. I don't know if I need a vote yay on top of everything, but like, it's alright. Key parts, but that's the thing about science like this, you got to measure something at some point. Exactly, baseline. You got to put your neck out and try it. They had to get a baseline. Yeah. Kate Luminant says, that's one thing as well, not sure I want to rate it, gave it a meh. Yeah, it's fair. It's like, you know, it's fine. It's like, you need a baseline. It's an interesting analysis or attempt to analyze what the goods of philosophy education are. It's not even necessarily doing philosophy. It's philosophy education. And so it's like, what is that? And that still falls under, like, philosophy as a topic, but it's interesting. So, yeah. Luma says, Nog Naval not quite right because it's not only for academics, it's only for philosophy majors insecure about their major choice. Yeah, that too. But it's also for, as Sock now was pointing out, it's also for administrators to justify keeping a philosophy department or not. Chocolate says, are there better ways to get these kinds of results? You could take a test prep program. Oh man, I lost fucking what? Why did I lose my bot? Come on, man. This is interesting. I used a different program to run my, what's it called? Stream Deck. My Stream Deck's down. You're going to split the difference here? Yeah, navel gazing and a Nog knife. Tindialis gave it a vote meh. Yeah, cool.